Today is Remnant from the Ashes, new DLC, Subject 2923. And joining me from Gunfire Games is David Adams. David, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Likewise, likewise. So the thing I want to start with you here is the success of this game. I mean, you guys really kind of came out of nowhere on this. It went from being, I think when it was announced, to, oh, it's the Darksider team's other game, to now its own completely legitimate success. So how has that felt for you guys at the studio now to have two hit games going?
Yeah, it's been awesome. I mean, when we started the project, it was really small. It was like me and two other people working on it for like 8 months. So it's been really satisfying to see it go from that as sort of just this fledgling little project that we were trying stuff out with in the studio to where it is now has been pretty amazing.
Do you think is it fair to call it a Souls-like game? Is that a moniker that you wear proudly, or that you maybe kind of want to redirect elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing we liked about the Souls franchise that we wanted to put in there was that sense of like, hey, this isn't easy. You actually have to pay attention to what you're doing and actually be good at the game to defeat it. Obviously, beyond that, there's a lot of differences. It's drop in, co-out, drop out, co-out. It's gun-based. It's, random dungeons and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, absolutely. From a mastery point of view, I don't mind the comparison.
So tell me, what is Subject 2923? Like, what it's DLC certainly, but what does that refer to?
It's actually, so if people have played the game and read the lore, they will maybe be able to figure out what it's referring to, because it actually does reference something in the base game. But without getting into too much spoiler territory, there's always been this sort of like pseudoscience aspect to the game. I mean, you go to other fantasy worlds and get magic items and stuff, but if you explored around the base game, there's a lot of stuff on Earth, and you get into the science of how they're traveling between these worlds and all the different things that are involved in that. And there is a reference in the lore somewhere to Subject 2923, so for intrepid lore scourers, they can kind of sort of piece together what it's about.
I like that. So it's almost sort of a kind of a game within a game here of exploring the actual mystery there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, once you play the DLC, you wouldn't have to find the lore in the base game, but yeah. It's there for people to want to figure out, and they can see the connection between this and the base game.
So what is the new stuff in here? We're taking a look at some footage now. I mean, it seems like we've got some new locations at the very least. What is kind of what's on the menu for Subject 2923 for players that dive into this?
The DLC is way bigger than the first one. The first one, we fleshed out one of the biomes. We added a new game mode, the survival mode, which is really cool. For this DLC, it's a whole new story. So it continues the story kind of where we left off in the base game, and it goes through all new areas. Like you go to sort of a rural area on Earth, like farms and stuff like that. What you're seeing here is actually a whole new world. It's sort of like this ice world ruled by rats. I would say the name of it, but I actually can't think of the name right. We have all our unofficial terminology, so I don't want to say the wrong thing, but the rats are called the Eureki or something like that. But it's a whole new biome. It's, quests, bosses, mini-bosses, a bunch of different dungeon types, and it's equivalent to one of the biomes in the base game. And there's other areas in addition to this in the game as well.
And did I see, were those kind of look like wyverns, those flying creatures that you were attacking?
Yeah, they're like these giant flying bat type creatures. So this world's like all rodents, I guess you could say, or pest rodents. But they're humanoid, so they talk and they're intelligent, and they build their own societies, and it's pretty cool. There's a lot of cool lore on here to discover, and that's one of the great things about Remnant is that when you go through the Red Crystal, we can make up whatever we want. Like all the worlds are completely different, isolated, and there's really nothing that connects them other than they're part of the same metaverse. So we have a lot of freedom when we're creating new worlds to just explore and do cool stuff. Now,
one of the real selling points, I think, of Remnant, and I know from the bits I've played, is so you're randomly rolling the area every single time, right?
Correct. Yeah, the dungeons are randomly generated. I mean, the maps themselves, but the quests you get are randomly generated. The mini bosses you get, the bosses you get. So like you, as with the base game, you could play through this DLC multiple times, and you're probably not going to get every quest. So it gives you an opportunity to not only have a different experience from another player who played the same content and saw a completely different quest, but it gives you the opportunity to replay it and experience new content.
So the footage we're seeing here obviously is single player, but a big highlight of Remnant, a big selling point, a big draw to it, is 3-player co-op. Now, how does the sort of challenge differ there? It's a challenging game unto its own, but does it scale based on the number of players, or do you sort of pre-select a difficulty per player? How does it work for Remnant?
No, we actually do a lot of different scaling stuff. We scale the stats of the creatures, but we try to do it in a way where it doesn't change the feel. Like, we don't want an enemy to suddenly take 20 shots to kill, because that kind of ruins the feel of the game. But we also scale the types of creatures that you spawn. We scale the quantity of creatures that spawn. Overall, I think the scaling works pretty well. Like, you can, if anything, it actually gets slightly more challenging, I think, in multiplayer than it does in single player, in a way that doesn't ruin the pacing of the game.
Right. So if somebody watching this is getting interested, but they haven't played any Remnant yet, but now they're like, all right, I'm going to fire this thing up. So how does Subject 2923 integrate into the main game? Is it just seamless, like it was always there from the beginning if you didn't know any better? Is it more of an expansion pack type of thing that you play after you complete the core game? What's sort of the structure for it?
It's probably, I would say it's probably more of an expansion pack, but the way all our stuff is designed is you can do it in any order. So even if you've never played the game, you could jump right into Subject 2923 and play that campaign, and then you could play the main campaign next. I mean, the story wouldn't make sense because it's backwards, but and then in addition to that, we have Adventure Mode, which is you can go into any biome. You know, like the base game, we have the jungle, the swamp, we have the desert, ROM, and then we have Earth, and you can go in and just play a single biome and get quests. Well, this adds new biomes into that. Like that snow area is a new biome that you can now. And again, you can do that moment one. If you don't even care about the story, you can just jump in and do Adventure Mode. Or with our new Survival Mode, all the new bosses and mini bosses will be rolled into that. So you could play Survival Mode, and now you get a whole new suite of bosses potentially through that.
Well, you kind of hinted at some cool story stuff with the very idea of Subject 2923. What is kind of for folks that are drawn to a good narrative and definitely want that story element with their game? What is sort of the elevator pitch version of Remnant's story?
I think the high level is that it takes place in 1968. That's when the world ended, but it's because we interpreted some alien writing and made some weird red gate thing, which caused our Earth to be invaded by these creatures called the Root, which sucked for humanity because 80 years of being basically killed by these root creatures, which you're seeing right now. But it's cool for gamers because now you can go through those red crystals and go to all these crazy worlds, and that's a result of those gateways that the humans created. So it really is. We just wanted to make a game where you could just do whatever, and we could do whatever, and had a lot of possibilities for the player.
So is the thinking then to just kind of almost keep Remnant alive as a living type of game that you'll just keep pouring new content into, or at some point is there sort of an end to the roadmap and you might move on to a full and proper sequel?
I think that this is the last big DLC we're going to do for the first game, so from that we'll see what happens.
Now, I can't help but notice the giant hammer on the back of the character that we were seeing there fight through for a minute. So there's would you say that, can you really specialize in melee or ranged, or is, no matter who you're playing as, are you going to kind of maybe just be mixing it up depending on the situation?
I think most people are going to mix it up. I mean, you could play fully ranged, of course. Some people try to play melee. There's probably a few bosses where you can't because they'll do moves where they out of range, but you can play a big chunk of the game fully melee if you want to.
What about the boss side? Like, is it, do you go for, I guess where I'm going with it is, how do you make a tough boss encounter? Like, you can't just throw hit points at something necessarily. What is it about, what makes a good boss encounter that in Remnant, at least?
I mean, obviously different bosses have different techniques to that. Sometimes we'll do ads for the bosses. That's probably like the cheapest way to do it. I think sometimes it's learning their behavior or their patterns. So, it's like the typical boss fight thing where you go in and you're like, oh, wow, that guy killed us in like 30 seconds. All right, we need to figure out those moves to try to avoid them. Staging to the boss fights, like we had a really tough boss fight, the Elf Queen in the last DLC, and she had a really big transformation after you got through stage 1. So once you learn the pattern of stage 1, it's like, oh crap, now we got to learn the pattern from stage 2. And ultimately, we want people to feel like they mastered the boss at the end of the day and accomplished something when they defeated it. So we definitely want it to be a challenge.
So roughly how many hours of new content are we looking at here for Subject 2923?
I think if you just beeline through the story, you're probably looking at like maybe 5 or 6 hours, 5 hours. But I think if you include all the content that you won't see by beeline through the story, I don't know, double, triple that. I don't. Your guess is as good as mine.
Well, I guess it'll be fun to find out. Now, the big question, of course, when can we play this? When is Subject 2923 due out?
It's out in August, and I feel terrible because I don't know the exact date.
That's right. You're pretty busy trying to finish the darn thing. It's understandable if you don't have the exact date on you. We can Google from there. But David Adams, thank you so much. Remnant from the Ashes, big hit game, getting a big new, excellent, hopefully excellent piece of DLC. If anything, to go by there based on what we just saw, it looks real good.